think one of the challenges that a lot of people have when they've got issues which we commonly call mental health problems is that much of the so-called support or help is helping you to cope with the problem rather than helping you to release the problem. So what's the difference? Coping means that you have to do the prescribed action or coping strategy quite possibly on a daily basis to keep your demons at bay. Whereas releasing is a one-off thing. That means that you follow that process once, you release whatever is bothering you, and you never have to come back to that issue ever again. You get on with the rest of your life. And I guess there's a couple of reasons for that. If we look at the field of psychology in particular, the models of psychology are really, really useful, and there's many great psychologists have produced useful models over a number of decades. But where it feels that psychology stops is at the point where you want to do something with the model. Then from a number of psychologists I've worked with, they do their own studies, some of them just make stuff up. But a number of them, in fact, all of the ones I've met, and obviously that's not a scientific study here, it's more anecdote, but all of the ones I've met have got their own issues, which suggests to me that the reason they studied psychology in the first place is they're trying to answer the question, what's wrong with me? And I think the same is probably true for psychiatrists, though I've met fewer of those. Therapists, the number of people I've met who thought that their therapist was more screwed up than they were. So a lot of these people are trying to answer the question, what's wrong with me? Now, the reason that's important in cope versus release is they've never been able to release their own symptoms, their own problems. So what are the chances they're going to release yours? And the chances are slim. And then there's a second factor that plays along with this, is that if you are working with some kind of practitioner who hasn't released, then the number one emotion they're going to be governed by is fear. And so fears of not being good enough, fears of will I be able to afford to live in this day and age. So a lot of them need a meal ticket client, one that keeps coming back, because that solves the problem for them about how they're going to feed their family and go on holiday and all the things that people want to do. But you've got to ask yourself, is that my role in life to be a meal ticket for somebody else? And I would argue no. Your role in life is not to be dependent on another to help you cope. I think it's Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal, talks about, seeing a psychiatrist for years. And I'm always thinking, when I hear that kind of story, well, who is benefiting from that relationship? Is it the psychiatrist or is it the client? And I argue if the psychiatrist is only helping you cope, but you still have the problem, it's actually the psychiatrist that's benefiting from that relationship, not you. What you need to do is to find someone who can help you release your problem so you can get on with the rest of your life. So what's important to bear in mind then is that there is actually nothing wrong with you. And this is I would say 99%, again, not a scientific study, anecdotally, 99% of people are actually perfectly fine. All they need to do is release what's happened to them. Notice what happened to them, not what's wrong with them. And we typically ask people what's wrong with you, but actually what we should be asking is what's happened to you, because that puts a different frame of reference. We're then looking at the external event and not inside the person for the cause of the problem, and that's really important too. So just remember that it's not about what's wrong with you, scrub that idea, it's about what's happened to you. And once we release what's happened to you, you're able to get on peacefully with the rest of your life without any of the things that are currently troubling you. And that's a really important distinction. So when we talk about coping, there's what I'll call negative coping methods. That's anesthetizing my problem with maybe alcohol, drugs, food, sex, lots of kinds of obsessive behaviors. These are all what I call anesthetics. And if you're anesthetizing yourself, it's a form of coping. And what I find fascinating is some of the richest people in the world who could afford any help that there was available to them still turn to alcohol and drugs rather than the help. And that implies that then either that help didn't work for them, or they chose not to ask for it. But I do find it slightly ironic that some of the richest people in the world don't seem to be able to access the sort of help they need, and yet a lot of the people who are not in that realm financially are able to actually release their problems. Don't ask me why that is, I just don't know. So let's move from the unofficial and the maybe unhelpful coping or maintenance strategies to the helpful ones. And there's really two things that come to mind here. One is mindfulness, and this is about choosing the focus of your thoughts. And the other one would be yoga. Believe it or not, target shooting is very helpful if you've ever done it. And the reason it's so therapeutic, excuse the aeroplane flying overhead at the moment, the reason it's so therapeutic is you can't focus on anything but the target. And that's why it works so well. So perfectly harmless as long as it's only focused on that. So the mindfulness, the keeping one thing in mind, the yoga, form of relaxation, meditation would be another one. But of course, the perennial problem with all of these things is the ability to release what's bothering you. So for example, if mindfulness was not available to you or yoga wasn't available to you, what would happen? Would you get worse? Would you stay the same, or would you get better? And that's the clue about release. And conventionally, what doesn't help is when people say, oh, this takes many years of work. Well, is that many years of work keeping you dependent on that person and paying them money for your coping mechanism, or is it actually helping you progress on your journey? So that begs the question, well, what is release? Release is where you literally unhook or decouple the emotion that you're experiencing from the event that happened. And what you should be able to do when you've released, as I check with my clients, is I ask them the question, can you still remember that event? Yes, I can. Okay. And what emotion are you experiencing now you're recollecting that event? And if the answer's none, I feel neutral, I don't feel anything, that's a clue that the client has released. And I always ask them, how do you feel? So it's the client's reference, not mine. It's the client's experience, not mine. And this is the sort of dialogue you should be in with whoever is helping you, is what are your feelings? Don't rely on someone to tell you that you have or haven't released. It's what you feel inside that makes the difference. So if the noise has gone down, there's no chatter in your head, if you're peaceful when things previously might have, I hate to use the word, but previously have triggered you, you know you've released. So that then brings us to the next point. So we know sort of in a way what release is, we know what it feels like. How do you do it? And this is the sort of the hard point, because having asked people that I've worked with, so how would you advise another person? Would you be able to do this by yourself? And the answer comes back with, well, you need someone to ask you the questions. And the way I interpret this is you need a guide on this journey. It's much easier with a guide to help you get to the point you need to see a different perspective on what's happened, and to help you through the learning process that allows you to decouple the emotion from the event. And that's really all you need to do. And another little analogy that's important here is a bit like when you're gardening. All gardeners know that if they go round with a pair of scissors and cut the leaves off weeds, well, the very next week the weed will have grown back. And so coping is basically going around the garden, keep cutting the leaves off the weed. So superficially it all looks weed free, but the roots of the weed are all still there. Releasing is going to the weed, getting down to the tip of the root and digging the whole weed out, and then it doesn't regrow. That patch is now weed free. And this is really what we're talking about, is how you do that, that decoupling event and emotion, by working out what you need to learn, the perspective you need to take, so that you reframe that event from your past and let go of the emotion. And remember, take yourself as the guide. Only you know if the tension in your body is dissipating, if the level of emotion you're feeling is going down. That tells you that you're releasing or not releasing, not the words you're hearing from the person that are working with you. So the 3 key points. Number 1, if you're seeking help, assess for yourself, does this person have greater problems than I do? Listen to their language, how they express themselves. Look at their face. Have a look at their body language. Are they, down at the mouth? Do they appear to be a little bit listless, lacking in energy? Is there a nervousness about them? Just assess these things, one human being to another, and come to your own judgment about, in that first conversation you have with them, does this person have more issues than I do? Or actually, is this person going to be someone that's going to help? Second thing, remember, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what's happened to you. And that is a very, very important distinction. And obviously the third message that probably goes without saying, but I'm going to repeat it anyway, is remember, your objective is to release the consequences of what's happened to you rather than cope with the consequences of what's happened to you.